Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Flipping the Barrel, a podcast where we interview leaders in the energy space to uncover and find out more about their career and life journeys. Today, without further ado, we are really looking forward to having Arne Solend on the podcast. He heads up Equinor's M&A and Insight team. He previously held different leadership roles in corporate communications and worked at the CEO office. Before joining Equinor, he was a journalist, a consultant, and worked in the public sector. He is a graduate from the Norwegian School of Economics with a business administration degree as well. And it's not so much degrees and where Arne is today, but it's also his social media content. If you do not follow him, we highly recommend you do. We'll be running through some of his content today on kind of the misperceptions that he has addressed online that have just really opened up a lot of people's eyes on leadership, on just diversity and inclusion as well. And so Arne, we're so excited to have you today and just kind of dive into all of these details about not just your life, but also some of the stuff you're passionate about as well.
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're excited to finally get you on the podcast. I know it's been a long time coming. First we wanted to start before we dig into your LinkedIn and all the amazing content that you put out on leadership. But let's start with you and where you're from. You are from a very, very small Norwegian village. I would like to know how many people, and which was characterized by rural farming, and there was not a high school there, which meant that you had to leave for boarding school at the age of 16 to explore broader horizons. Your father was a farmer, and he was tending to 18 milk-producing cows, and your mother was a teacher. Did you ever envision that your path would lead you to work in oil and gas and where you are today leading Equinor?
No, can't really say that it did. And as you said, it's a small village, I think around 40 people living there today. So it's a relatively small community. When I grew up in Norway, of course, the oil and gas industry, it's always there. It's a big industry in Norway, but it's more in the background for me. So I didn't really know anyone who was working in the industry, didn't really know much about it. The job I'm doing today, I didn't know existed even at the time. So that certainly wasn't really on my career path. So what I wanted to do was to go out and work in the media. I thought that was what the cool kids did at the time. So being a journalist was my career goal, not going into oil and gas.
That's really interesting, actually, that you say media. So does that mean back then you were watching like the TV, the news? Was that like a big thing for you upbringing? Because saying like, I want to be in the media and be a journalist seems very specific.
Yeah, well, always had an interest, I guess, in storytelling and watching the news and following what's going on. So then that eventually then led me into working for one of the bigger newspapers in Norway as well. This was a while back, so this was still when paper media was a big thing. The internet was just starting to be a bit of an annoying side thing for the newspapers and the media organization. So I would say it was the good old days of print press.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so interesting when we first met was you were talking about how you were a journalist and a writer, and I was really trying to connect the dots on how did you end up working for Equinor in the oil and gas industry as a journalist? So walk us back through that. I'd love to hear kind of what inspired you into the energy industry. I know when we spoke, you also mentioned the energy transition wasn't really a prominent topic then, but it was something that you were interested in and you were writing for and about. And you ended up utilizing a lot of your communication skills throughout your leadership roles at Equinor. Can you talk a little bit about how you transitioned into actually working for Equinor and what you gained from being a journalist?
Yeah, so always when people ask me, okay, so how should I get into what you do? I say I'm the last person you should ask about it, actually, because I did take a bit of an unusual path into it, but after then graduating from business school, I did work for a few years as a journalist. Then paper print was declining, so things were going a bit downhill, and we were cutting costs and all of it. So I decided, okay, I was a bit too young at the time to be old and grumpy, so decided to make a shift career-wise, and then went and worked in a PR consultancy. And then had Statoil, which later became Equinor at the time, as one of our clients, actually. So that was my real first touch point and interaction with the industry. So worked with them on that side for a while. I think eventually they got tired of paying the high bills, so they decided to hire me instead back in 2010. So then the oil price was well above $100. So I guess that was a good time to join the industry, obviously. And since then it's never looked back, and it's an accidental but very good choice, I would say, in some ways.
It's so interesting just how we end up in certain areas of our careers or even life by just making a random decision or a proposal that can change and lead to where you are today. So, after joining Statoil, which became Equinor, you had different roles in communication, and you progressed to working directly with the CEO as part of his office before transitioning to your current position in the commercial side and M&A. With such diverse exposures across various facets of the company and leadership roles, can you tell us a little bit about just what you've learned through effective teams, leadership, and communication? And something specific that I also want to ask is how important communication is in a good leader. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't focus on as a skill to have, but you being communication and working with the CEO, can you tell us a little bit about the importance of communication?
So if you're a senior leader, most of your job is communication, of course, and that's one of the big shifts in your career when you go from being an employee to being a leader. And in any sense, of course, you go from doing to leading others. Most of that is communication in one sense or another. Of course, do you have a clear vision and objectives? Are you able to kind of communicate that to the team? Are you able to connect with people on the team, kind of understand what's important to them? What do they respond to? Do you pick up on the signals, both from other teams within your organization, from the outside? Then as you move on and you move to the top of a company, of course, it's even more, and especially on the external side as well, you're expected to then represent the company. So I think there's very few things about leadership that isn't communication in one sense or another, but it's also something that we don't necessarily always invest a lot in when we train leaders, of course, or select them. So it's an important but sometimes underlooked skill, I would say.
So when you worked with the CEO, what I'd like to know is, as the role progressed with him, did you actually write stuff for him that he had to then interpret and read? Or I always find that role really interesting. Like, does the CEO really write everything that he actually says, or is somebody writing it for him? How did that work for you when you were in that role?
Well, I think that is it's an iterative process, of course, and it always starts with, okay, what do you want to say, and that idea and the content, and that needs to come from the person who's actually going to be delivering it. And then where we can help, of course, is then you take that message and you try to help craft it, and what's the best way of delivering this. And then, of course, there are many places where you're expected to appear, and then you repurpose this and make sure that it's consistent. So I think it needs to come from the person, but of course it's a very busy job. So where you do need people to help you out is preparing for the different events and how are you going to deliver the message. But I think if it doesn't actually flow from the person themselves, then people will quite easily see through it.
Yeah. I actually had another question on this. So, I feel like we live in a time where leadership is held almost to a different standard when it comes to social media. Nowadays, I would say a lot of employees want like that real, authentic. We want you to share your struggles. We want you to share your failures. We want you, but I think, leadership, they've grown up, I would say, in a different era where you had to hold yourself to being almost perfect and with the tie and everything. So how do you think that balance is nowadays of like how much is sharing too much? How vulnerable should leadership be? When it comes to creating a social media account or having that like online presence?
So a good question, especially if you work for a big corporate, of course, because the tendency and the instinct of a big corporation is to not stand out, and any kind of communication or message that you put out normally will have gone through comms, it will go through legal, and your gold standard is kind of not rocking the boat very often. So that I think also, of course, does something to leaders in big companies, and it can sometimes be a bit cautious. Maybe you don't really want to do something that could get you into trouble, and that, as you say, how does that meet now then with the expectations that are out there? And I think there's no one answer to it, and people, of course, will very easily see through if you attempt then to fake some of these things as well. So that is one of the tricky things about authenticity. Of course, you can't then pull up the corporate facade or hide behind it. It actually needs to be you, and you need to be behind it.
Well, you've definitely done an amazing job at your social media. So can you tell us a little bit about when you got started, what sparked that first post, and how has the feedback been?
Yeah, so I got going really, I think, on LinkedIn maybe year and a half ago or something like that. Had always been on there, of course, and had a profile, but didn't really post much stuff. So not sure exactly how it was going. I think it was probably my wife who said I needed to get going, and she works in marketing and communication, so she is very good at it, of course. So she challenged me to see, okay, can't you also do something here? And of course, in Norway, one of the social rules is, you should not stand out or draw any kind of attention to yourself, especially not on something quite as cringe-worthy as LinkedIn. So that's more an American thing to do, of course, than a Norwegian one. So it's a bit of a barrier to get over when you start, but I think for me it's been a very positive experience as well, and I think a great opportunity really to connect with lots of people across the industry, all sorts of places. I mean, that's how we met, right? So I think really a fantastic platform to discuss some of the things that matter in the industry, and to connect with like-minded people, and also those, of course, who disagree. So that's one of the sides of being on social media. You really get to hear all kinds of arguments. Those who think that this is stupid and you shouldn't have put it up, and those who agree. So it's also a good way of tapping into what's moving.
Well, one of your most viral posts, which kind of goes back to when you're talking about having that voice and probably hearing some of the naysayers too, whenever you do post stuff specifically to oil and gas, you posted something around, can we be proud working in oil and gas? Which was for us like a really important post, because at Flipping the Barrel, like we're very, very proud of the oil and gas industry. We even have Fun Fact Fridays where we educate on what the oil and gas industry does for the world. Tell us about what made you want to post this, and then also some of the feedback that you got from it.
Yeah, that one took a bit off, and the question was, as you say, okay, can we be proud of working in the oil and gas industry these days? Like really, with everything that's going on in the energy transition, and with the backdrop of climate change and all of it, and it's something in Norway, this is a topic that's much debated, of course. So Norway, on the one hand, built a lot of its economy and on the oil and gas industry. At the same time, it's a country that has high ambitions when it comes to the energy transition and climate change. So where does that leave our industry in a way? And I think increasingly it's also a more global debate. It's also one we have in the team, and when people join, they might say, okay, I'm joining Equinor, but I don't want to work on the oil and gas side. I prefer to work on the renewable stuff, right? So what I try to get at with that post is really looking at the role this industry plays in society today. It's an industry that matters to a lot of people. What we do is just so crucial for everyone. It's hard to even imagine life without us. Then I think being out there telling that story like you do, and actually showing who are the people behind this industry, what is it actually working on, what are the attitudes and competencies, and how can we play actually a positive role also in the energy transition. That I think to me is a sense of pride, but it is something, of course, where people have different opinions, and we take a lot of heat as an industry, and by all means we're not perfect. I think that's plain for all to see, but if you look closer, I think this industry is really full of great people who want to make a positive difference.
I love that. Can you tell us a little bit about just Norway? As somebody, both Jamie and I have never stepped foot in Norway, don't know too much about it. Can you tell us a little bit about how the oil and gas industry is perceived by the regular average person who doesn't work in oil and gas? Is it like, for example, in the Middle East, where it's like you go to school, you become a petroleum engineer, you most likely will get a job in an oil and gas company, and that's kind of what people want to do because this is the big thing that you do here. Mexico was the same thing with Pemex, like this is what's running this entire country and they're very proud of it. How is Norway? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Norway, a relatively small country, of course, around 5 million people live here. And then interestingly, most of the oil and gas industry in Norway that is focused on the west coast. So it's offshore, of course, then off the coast of Norway, which means that then that part of the country, of course, a lot more people work in the industry as well. So that is kind of our Texas, if you like. So there people have kind of grown up with this. It's everyone will have someone in the family working in the industry. They will consider that as quite a natural career choice, at least they used to. Then on the east coast, where you kind of then are a little bit more removed from it, it still filters in and it's there in the background, but it's more abstract to a lot of people. I think they haven't been out, seen a platform or visited an oil rig or anything like that. So then I think you kind of get a more intellectual relationship to it in a way, and maybe you also see more of the negative sides. So I think it depends how close you are to it, and of course Norway has been a very lucky country in striking oil, but also made some good choices, I think, in how the money and the wealth that industry has generated has actually been used to benefit all of society, and it's gone into our sovereign wealth fund, where it's now being then managed for future generations and kind of to the benefit of the whole of the country, or that's the idea at least.
Yeah, because when you think of Norway, in my view, like I think of like offshore and like the North Sea and like all of the oil that had come from that and that development. It must have helped the country so much. And I do feel just like in Texas, we all kind of lose sight of that. So I think it's really important. And that's why I love the content that you share. And also, us in our personal lives, sharing that and what we do, I think is just so important. And Norway has made so many huge steps also in the energy transition space. But at the end of the day, a lot of that still comes from the offshore play. When we talk about the oil and gas industry, another key topic and one that you do discuss online as well is this dual career and like the disparities between women and men. And you definitely feel this because your wife also works. And you have pointed out multiple times too on your posts as well about just the differences and like how your wife gets seen versus you get seen. Like you being the hero dad for picking up the kids, but her being like, oh God, there she goes again, missing a meeting because she's has to pick up the kids. Can you tell us like the challenges of that? And especially being a leader, how can leaders change the way that we look at this? Because I think it really does come down from the top as well as, who your manager is.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are still some differences, of course. And one of the things our industry struggles a bit with is exactly diversity and especially then attracting and recruiting and being able to promote women. And of course, when you first have kids, or when you start a family, that is a major inflection point career-wise, both for men and women. But I think for most men, having kids, that is actually a positive. At least it's been a positive for me. So nobody ever asked me, are you planning to have kids when I went to interview for any jobs. When my kids were born, nobody thought twice about me taking parental leave. That didn't set me back at all. Didn't cost me any kind of promotions or progression in my career. I think on the contrary, actually, people kind of think a little bit better of you once you're a family man. You're more respected, and now that is seen as a good thing. And whenever you do leave to pick up the kids, of course. You don't get the evil eye as a guy when you do that. It's more oh, what an amazing thing that a dad can do that. So I think that the bar is in one way depressingly low for men in that sense. So I think also, of course, this is maybe a bit of a generational thing as well. So if you're a leader high up in a big oil and gas company today, you probably came up during different times where it was more the norm that men went to work and women would look after kids. But I think today the expectations for most young couples is that both people should be able to have a career, and then important for companies to then understand, okay, what does that mean, and is this burden shared equally at home, and how do you also shape work life so that both parents will have the opportunity to play an equal part, both being with their family and their kids, of course, but also participating at work. So hopefully some of this is changing for the better, but it's still definitely not where it needs to be.
That was one of my favorite posts that you've put out so far. And the amount of comments, likes, people resharing it, just because it spoke to so many people, both men and women, and I think that's something that we all really like about your posts, is that you're saying things that nobody wants to say, or you're posting things that like everybody thinks about, but her Arnie's gonna do it for us. So we applaud you for that. And do you think, and for me, what was interesting is I've always seen Norway, or at least a lot of countries in that area, very far into women empowerment and women in leadership roles compared to other countries where we're way behind in other areas. So for me, that perspective was still like, oh, wow, in this one country that I think women are in so many different roles, way further along than we are. I think it is Norway where garbage men are women, construction, there's women. Like, it's a country where a lot of women are doing a lot of those male dominated roles from what I've seen on social media or on, TV, etc. So it was really interesting that was still happening and that you were able to kind of highlight it, and the rest of the world all connected with you on that. What do you think is something that we can do to progress more women to corporate level? The C-level executives, I think, is still less than 10% across the industry. What are we missing? Because there is female talent coming into the industry. There are more women year on year graduating from STEM degrees. So the pipeline is getting better, but we still somehow miss in that middle career range, which is usually when you start to have kids after like 10-ish years of being in the industry, they drop off or they're not promoted to higher roles. What do you think as a leader yourself? Like, what is something that you're seeing that maybe, is it the workplace? Is it us not being driven enough or thinking like we want the roles or applying for the roles? Is it a confidence thing? Like, what do you think is still holding women for leadership roles?
Well, I'll tell you what it isn't. I don't think it is women being less ambitious, or certainly not less smart or able to do these jobs, especially in a corporate setting. The things we work on, those are spreadsheets and PowerPoint. So I think certainly that should be within reach. So it's definitely not that. Then I think, when it comes to diversity, there's lots of excuses going around. So I call this the kind of the dog ate my diversity approach. Because if you go out and talk to people and say, okay, why is it like this? Then you'll get a whole raft of excuses, right? And you've listed some of them. But when I look at our industry and what we are good at, we are pretty good at setting targets and very ambitious targets in other areas. So, how long of a lateral well will you drill, or, how many barrels are you going to produce, and how quickly will you bring something on stream, and what is your safety record. So things that we care about, we measure and follow up, and we set goals on. I'm not sure we really do that when it comes to diversity. So if you go out and speak to people and companies across the industry, how many of them will actually have a goal for this and say, okay, for our senior leadership positions, this is the level of representation we are targeting, and this is how we're working to improve it. And so do you set those goals? Do you hold leaders accountable for reaching them? Because in my experience, there's enough good candidates out there once you actually go looking for them.
And I see that too in just panels and like events. So for an example, like when we do our event, it takes us a while. Like we have to be very thoughtful on who we choose, because a lot of people just choose the same people every time that they've seen speak before. And I think it's to that point of like, we have the ability to set massive goals and things and break records that the world has never seen. Like, for instance, when you said the longest lateral drilled or the fastest well drilled or the amount of barrels being produced by something. But when it comes to actually diversity or how are we really going to get there? I think we definitely have what it takes to do it. We've done it before, but I love your approach on my dog ate my diversity, because it's so true. It's always like this example of, oh, well, I don't know what happened. We got to figure this out. So I really like your approach on that. I did want to ask you one question before we close, and that's around your recent post on micromanaging. I really felt that, because I do feel like a lot of leaders, they take on a micromanaging approach. How do you think somebody who is doing that can shy away from having that type of approach, especially being a new leader, when you want to hit goals and you want to watch your team succeed? How do we not become a micromanager?
Yeah, tricky one. And I think especially tricky if you're a leader who's been promoted from within a team, of course, because then you have often been selected because you're very good at what you used to do. And then suddenly you're now then managing a team who is doing what you used to do yourself. And then I think the instinct and the inclination, of course, is to dig in and see where can I improve. And you are maybe a little bit anxious as well, because you're responsible, of course, for the quality of what that team delivers, right? But we all know there's nothing more annoying than having a micromanager or somebody who kind of is looking over your back and, could you run this past me? And before you kind of send that email, could I just have a little look at it? So it's definitely the quickest way to demotivate your team. So if you feel that, okay, I can't really trust these people, I think you need to ask yourself why is that? Is it the wrong team, or is it something within you? Why aren't you able to do it? And then I think, good leaders, they should reflect a bit on the answer to that question, because letting go of control, one of the hardest things probably to do, especially if you're a new leader, as well. So one interesting thing, I think, when in what we do, we of course lead very cross-disciplinary teams. So it's technical people, it's commercial people, it's kind of everything from reservoirs to marketing and all of it. And sometimes it can almost be easier to lead people in an area where you don't know it that well, because then you really depend on, and you have to trust. So when I speak to commercial people, I will also always have very strong views on what they are doing. But if it's a reservoir engineer, then I'm not really able to kind of go in and override that with my judgment. So then you have no choice but trusting people, and it kind of tends to work out.
Well, I think we can go on and just talk to you about every single post and get deeper. But just to end the podcast, tell us, looking back at your career, what is the best piece of advice that maybe somebody gave you early on that you still use today to do the best that you can in corporate and kind of continue to have a successful career? And second, what is one thing that you used to pay a lot of attention to and thought was very, very important when you were younger, that now you're wiser, you're like, don't pay attention to that, it doesn't matter?
Yeah, I would say ask a lot of questions, I think is probably the best advice. So that has been relatively consistent through all the jobs in different places I've been. So ask questions, and of course it's hard to do sometimes, because you want to appear as if you know stuff, and you don't want to be the ones asking the stupid questions. But and that is probably one thing I have stopped doing, is being afraid of asking. So very often, if I do have a question, I'll find that somebody else in the room didn't really understand stuff either. So probably when I was younger, I spent a lot of time appearing to be smart and on top of my brief, and kind of pretending to know stuff. So I've tried to stop doing that, and maybe just ask a bit more, and I think that works well.
It's also part of being vulnerable, and one of those qualities that I think a lot of people really value in leadership nowadays is just being vulnerable, and the respect of, I don't know, I'm going to get you that answer, versus pretending that you know it all. And so I think that's just such a great way to end the podcast.
I just want to say it's been absolutely a pleasure having you. I loved your content on social media to begin with, but I love meeting you as a person, and just knowing that you came from this small town, literally like 100, not a town, sorry, it's like a village,
40 people.
And then yeah, now seeing where you are today and what you have done, and then being a journalist to now where you're at in Equinor, I just think it speaks volumes that you never really know where your path might take you. And I love stories like yours that really take you really far in life, in some spot that you probably never thought you'd ever exist. And so thank you so much for that. And thank you for just all the content that you're sharing on LinkedIn. And please continue to do that. And if you're not following Arne, please follow him. We'll put his link down whenever we post his episode, but he's just incredible. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we should thank your wife for pushing you. We got to give credit where credit's due, right? So
yeah,
I will definitely tell her I'll push the episode onto her as well, so she can.
Yeah. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a review. Check us out on LinkedIn, on Instagram, TikTok, and our website, of course, www.flippingthebarrel.com. We'll catch you on the next episode.
See ya.